Hey guys, so we're doing section 4.4, which is dividing polynomials. So we're going to start with a little bit of review. What does long division look like? So if I want to do 1597 divided by 6, okay, I'm asking questions like, can 6 go into 1? It can't go into 1, so 6 can go into 15 though. So 6 times 2, we get 12. So I'm going to write 12 below the 15. And I'm going to write my 2 up top because it went in 2 times. And then I subtract, so I have 3 left. And I bring down my next number. So then how many times can 6 go into 39? 6 times, we get 36. 6 goes on top, 36 goes below, and we subtract. And we bring down our next number. And again, it can go in 6 times, so 6 goes on top, 36 goes below, and we subtract. So then we have 1 left, so we're going to write that as a fraction. So 1 over 6, because 6 is what we were dividing by. So this is our final answer. Okay, so we can do the same thing here. So 12 can't go into 7, but 12 times 6, we get 72. So we write a 6 up top, 72 below, and we subtract. And bring down our next number. And then 12 can go into 14 once. We subtract 12, we get 2 left. Bring down our next number. And then we can do 24. We have 5 left. So that's our remainder. It gets written as a fraction. Okay, so now we're going to do that, but with polynomials. Okay. So we're dividing this polynomial by x plus 5. So x plus 5 is our divisor. So then we ask, we're going to look at our first 2 things, x and x cubed. X times what gives us x cubed? Okay. So we have to multiply by x squared to get to x cubed. So that's what's going to go on top. And then we're going to also multiply the 5 times x squared. Okay, so these 2 things that I just have here are going to go right here, and we're going to subtract them. So I'm putting parentheses around it and subtracting it from what's above. So the goal is always to cancel out the first thing. So I canceled out my x cubes. And then I have 11x squared minus 5x squared, so I get 6x squared. And then I bring down my next thing. So now I want to cancel out this 6x squared. So I'm going to say x times what gives me 6x squared. So I need to multiply by a 6x to make 6x squared. So then I also take the 5 times 6x. And again, I'm going to write those down below, put parentheses around them, and subtract them. And when I multiplied by, the 6x goes on top. So now my 6x squared's canceled out because that's always our goal. 39x minus 30x, I get 9x. And then I bring down my next term. So now x times what gives me 9x? 9. Then I multiply my 5 times 9, get 45. Then I write that down below, put parentheses around it, and subtract it. And everything cancels out, so I don't have a remainder. So my answer is up here. Okay, and then we always have to have things written in standard form. So if you look, we're like missing some powers here. So we have to add zeros. So we have to add a 0x squared, a 0x, because we can't have missing terms when we're dividing. It'll mess up our dividing. Okay. So they're just kind of like a placeholder so we don't mess up any signs. So now x times what gives me x cubed. X times x squared gives me x cubed. Because I always want to cancel out the first thing. And then I take the negative 3 times the x squared. Put parentheses around it and subtract it. Okay? So the note, we're subtracting a negative. So it's going to become positive 3x squared. And we bring down a 0x. So then x times 3x gives me 3x squared. And I need to multiply it by the negative 3 also. Put parentheses around it, subtract it. The first thing is always going to cancel out. And then again, this time I have double negative, so it becomes a plus 9x. And I forgot to write my things on top, so let me write that real quick. And then this time I need to multiply by 9. And everything cancels out. So my answer is up here on top. Okay, if you notice on this one, they're not in order. We need to write them in order when we're doing our dividing. So highest power to lowest power. Otherwise, we'll get messed up. So now we're saying 2x times what is going to give me my first term, the 8x cubed. So I need to multiply by 4x squared. So I'm going to write that on top. And I'm going to multiply by 1 by that also. First term cancels out. 12x squared minus 4x squared, we get 8x squared. Bring down our next term. So then I have to multiply by something to get 8x squared. So I need to multiply by 4x. Put parentheses around it and subtract it. So then I get 2x left. I bring down my next term. Okay, this time all we have to do is multiply by 1. But then this time I have a remainder. So I need to rewrite my answer. And we are going to write our remainder. So our remainder is that 4. We're going to write it over our divisor. So over 2x plus 1. So this is our answer down here. So the remainder always gets just written as a fraction. And make sure you have a sign in between the constant and the remainder. They are not smushed together. They are two separate things. Okay? And then this one, our divisor is kind of bigger. We're dividing by a quadratic this time. But that's okay. It still works the same way. We just have to do more multiplying. Okay, so x squared times what gives us x cubed? X. Multiply everything else by the x. Put parentheses around it, subtract it. Make sure you're careful. There's, like, we're subtracting negatives, so 3x squared minus negative 2x squared becomes a plus, so it's 5x squared. And then negative 13x minus negative 3x becomes negative 13 plus 3, so negative 10x. And then we bring down our last term. And then x squared times 5 gives us 5x squared. And everything cancels out. Okay. So now we are going to look at synthetic division, which is doing the same thing, but writing it a little simpler. So we're only going to write our coefficients. So just the numbers in front. And then we draw this big upside down L and another smaller L at the end. Because whatever's in this last box will end up being our remainder. Okay, and then we're going to take our divisor, set it equal to 0, and solve for x. So we'd add our 4 over, we'd have x equals 4. That's what's going to go on the outside. Okay, so then our first number comes straight down. We're going to take this number and multiply by our divisor, so the 4 on the outside, and write it in our next column. And then we're going to add down. So negative 2 plus 4, we get 2. And then we take our 2, we multiply it by 4, so 4 times 2 is 8. We're going to write that in the next column and add down. Then we take negative 14 times 4, write it in the next column, and add down. So then these new numbers, these 3 numbers right here, the 1, 2, negative 14, these are going to be the coefficients of my new answer. Okay? So my original, the thing that I was dividing, started with an x cubed. So we're going to start 1 power down because we took an x away, right? So now we're going to start and write our answer at x squared. So I'm going to have 1x squared plus 2x minus 14. And then, like I said earlier, the last number is the remainder. So we write it over what we divided by. So over the x minus 4. And notice how I put the negative with the 16? That can be important sometimes because if we have more than one thing up here and we don't put the sign with it, things can get funky. So just keep that in mind. Like I would put the plus and then put the negative with the 16 on top of the fraction. Okay, so let's look this up again. We start by writing our coefficients. So just the number part. We draw our big F. Then we take our divisor, set it equal to 0, solve for x. So we get x equals negative 8. That's what goes in front. We take our first number, we move it straight down. Then we're going to multiply by the outside, so 1 times negative 8. I get negative 8. I'm going to write that in the next column and add straight down. And then I take negative 13 times negative 8 and write that in the next column. And add straight down. And then I take negative 8 times 84, write it in the next column, and add straight down. Then when I write my answer, so my original dividend started with an x cubed, I'm going to start 1 power down, so I'm going to start at x squared. And write my remainder over what I divided by. Okay, so then if we look at number 3, notice our powers are out of order. We need to make sure we write them in order before we start. And we don't have an x squared term, so we need to add a 0 for that one. Now I'm going to write my coefficients in my big L shape. Then I'm going to take my divisor, set it equal to 0, solve for x. So I get x equals 3. Okay, and then same process. First number goes straight down, multiply by the outside, write it in the next column. Add down. Multiply and write it in the next column. Add down. So then 3 times 0, write it in the next column. And then add down. Three times 0 again, we get 0. We're going to add down, so we have 5. And then 3 times 5, we get 0, 15, which when we add down, we get 0. So we have no remainder. So we are not going to write that last little fraction thing. And we're going to skip some powers. So like our original polynomial started at x to the 5th. So we're starting at x to the 4th. We count down from there. So when we write our answer, we're skipping the x squared and the x term. So we have x to the 4th minus 2x cubed plus 5. Okay. And then our next one, we don't have an x squared term or an x term. So when we write it in our big L shape, we need to include those zeros. Then we take our divisor, set it equal to 0. And that's what goes outside. First number comes straight down, multiply by what's in front, so 1 times 3 is 3. We add straight down. 3 times 3 is 9. We add straight down, we get 9. 3 times 9 is 27. We add straight down, we get 0. So we don't have a remainder this time either. And then our original polynomial started at x cubed, so we're going to start at x squared. Okay, so then whenever we have a divisor where like there's a number in front of the x, so it's not just a 1, some things can get funky. But the easiest way to deal with this is to go ahead and do the math like you normally would. So I'm going to write out my polynomials, and notice we don't have an x cubed term, so we put a 0. We're going to take our divisor, set it equal to 0, and solve for x. So we get a fraction this time. But then it's still the same thing. So we're going to move our 4 down. We multiply by 1/2, which is the same as dividing by 2. So 4 divided by 2, we get 2. We add down. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So we get 1. And then 1 plus negative 37 is negative 36. Divide by 2, we get negative 18. We add down, so we get negative 14. 14 divided by 2 is negative 7. We add down, we get 2. But then we have an extra step. So again, this comes from there being that 2 in front of the x. We need to account for that too. So we're going to divide our coefficients by 2 before we write our final answer. So our original power started at x to the 4th. So we're going to start at x cubed. So we have 2x cubed plus x squared minus 18x minus 7. And then our remainder does not get divided by 2 because we're writing it over the 2x plus 1. So it's being divided there, minus 1. Okay, so we're not going to write it again. There we go, all done.